Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
So this is a kind of a sort of continued riff on the theme, because it seems to be one that I come back to, but I think also other people do too. So I wanted to start with a little run of quotes and a poem. So one's by Okamura, which is, although it is not the only reality in our lives, self-identity is a reality for us, a tool we must use to live with others in society. I liked that sort of definition, as self-identity is a tool we must use to live with others in society. And then Eckhart Tolle says, give up defining yourself, to yourself or to others. You won't die, you will come to life. So give it up. And this poem is by Donna Fowles. It's called Awakening Now. Why wait for your awakening? The moment your eyes are open, seize the day. Would you hold back when the beloved beckons? Would you deliver your litany of sins like a child's collection of seashells, prized and labelled? Like a child's collection of seashells, prized and labels. No, I can't step across the threshold, you say, eyes downcast. I'm not worthy. I'm afraid, and my motives aren't pure, and I'm not perfect, and surely I haven't practiced nearly enough. My meditation isn't deep, and my prayers are sometimes insincere. I still chew my fingernails, and the refrigerator isn't clean. Do you value your reasons for staying small more than the light shining through the open door? Do you value your reasons for staying small more than the light shining through the open door? Forgive yourself. Now is the only time you have to be whole. Now is the sole moment that exists to live in the light of your true self. Perfection is not a prerequisite for anything but pain. Perfection is not a prerequisite for anything but pain. Please, oh please, don't continue to believe in your disbelief. This is the day of your awakening. And Rumi said, I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God. So I sort of, all those kind of spoke to me of this same sense we have of the perfectible or the other self that's going to be awake, or all the kinds of limitations that we impose on ourselves. And I wanted to kind of start with this story, and I know I've told it before, and I was thinking about maybe how often I've told it before. And I was thinking, there's a title of a book called Turning Words, and the reason I come back to this particular story, because for me it's kind of turning actions. So it is a real sort of moment of something for me, and I hope it'll have relevance for others, their own stories of turning actions or words. So some years ago, when Flint was coming much more regularly to the UK, once or twice a year, I was in a particularly low, kind of snaggly state prior to his arrival. I was really busy sort of torturing myself. And one of the main ways I was torturing myself was to be comparing myself to Josh, who I was considering an infinitely better student than I was. You know, in my mean mind, I was thinking of him as the bloody A student. There he goes, bloody A student. Um, and he was reading, you know, voraciously, and he seemed to me to be a much better Buddhist than me. And I was pretty convinced of this narrative, and it was very painful. And it was it was an expression of real lack of faith and trust in myself. But that's how I was really feeling. So we drove to the airport, we picked Flint up, and we drove back to our house. And previously, one of the little things that I'd nearly always done with Flint was to go and buy the flowers. This was in the days before we got a bucket of flowers delivered. So we would go into town and choose from whatever flowers were available. And so I'm kind of like, oh, do you want to come and get the flowers? And he's like, oh, no, I think I'm going to talk to Josh. So you can imagine how that went down. So, I walked into town on my own, seething, bloody A student, and sort of feeling more and more kind of crushed and horrible. So it was real petrol on the flames of both my self-criticism and my resentment. And I came back home with flowers, and I carried on doing whatever jobs I had to do. And Flint and Josh seemed to me to be particularly kind of chummy. They seemed to be whispering something and doing stuff. And I was feeling more and more kind of excluded and exiled. And, in my sullen state, it felt pretty unbearable. Of course, I was smiling. Here's Flint, how lovely. But inside, hot mess. And then Flint went up to his room, and Josh went back into town, and I was just sort of muttering around to myself. And when Josh came back, he was carrying this beautiful painting. And Flint and Josh had gone into town to buy me a beautiful painting because they were touched by how I was struggling. And I was so touched, and sort of sitting in waves of shame and embarrassment about the level of wrongness of my narrative, and how much it was a turning moment for me because of that sense of I've constructed this whole narrative of unworthiness, and I am busy being loved for who I am. I'm not being loved because I'm being an A student. I'm not being loved because I'm doing well. I'm just being loved. And it really made a difference. It touched me. And I was thinking, why does my story matter to any of you? Why would that matter? And it's because it's something that I kind of see and hear in so many places. And Tara Brach calls it, that we live in a trance of unworthiness. A trance of unworthiness. And we seem to, as humans, and so maybe particularly Western humans, we seem to find it so much easier to relate to the parts of ourselves that we identify as inadequate, contracted, not good enough, things that we should do better, too angry, too noisy, too whatever, or not enough of, or, we could all, I imagine, construct our own menus of how rubbish we are in the very many ways that we are. And it's interesting to me how persistent, how very persistent those narratives are. So here's a repetition of another story, and another story that touches me a lot. One day, Nangaku was visiting Basho's hut, and Basho stood and greeted him, and Nangaku said, "What have you been doing recently?" And Basho replied, I've done nothing but sit in Zazen." And then Nangaku said, "Why do you continually sit in Zazen?" And Basho answered, "I sit in Zazen in order to become a Buddha." Okay. So he carried on sitting in his Zazen. And Nangaku picked up a tile he found by the side of Basso's hut and started to polish it. Horrible grating noise. Basso eventually watched what he was doing and said, "Master, what are you doing?" And Nangaku answered, "I'm polishing this tile." And Basso asked, "Why are you polishing the tile?" And Nangaku answered, "To make a mirror." And Basso said, "How can you make a mirror by polishing a tile?" And Nangaku replied, "How can you become a Buddha by doing zazen?" How can you become a Buddha by doing zazen? Barry Majid says of this koan in Nangaku's rejoinder, how can you become a Buddha by doing zazen? It goes right to the heart of what I've described as curative fantasies. He says, Basso being a monk of great aspiration, great determination, devoting himself continually to studying zazen, and yet in a way that is completely imbued with this gaining idea. And with every gaining idea, there's always a kind of dichotomy or dualism that's deeply ingrained in the person's consciousness, an unacceptability of where they are, and a projection of an idealizable value, something that a seemingly unreachable goal, something that is forever on the horizon, no matter how hard we practice or how long. I imagine that's familiar for some of us, that sense of, we do this stuff, we do this stuff, we do this stuff, and I'm still the same old person. Something doesn't seem to change in some ways. All sorts of things fall away, but something often doesn't seem to change. When we were studying at the Hindu ashram, one of the depictions of Shiva was as the creator of all things. And it was a kind of little thing that we would often say with the other people in the ashram, we would laughingly look at someone being mean or stupid or ignorant or whatever, and, looking particularly un Shiva-like, and we go, that's a really good disguise. That's Shiva in a really good disguise. And that was a kind of way of sort of trying to acknowledge, we're all Shiva in a really good disguise, we're all Buddha in a really good disguise. And when we're polishing the tile to become something else, actually it's about recognizing that we are already Buddha. We're Buddha polishing a tile, and that we are already the mirror, and we are the person sitting personally doing zazen. We're already everything. We're already what we always have been and already are. And again, Barry Majid says here, if the tile is our ordinary mind, then the tile is our human nature and the mirror is our Buddha nature. Are these two things or one thing? What do you have to do to make them one thing? Well, of course, nothing at all. Nothing at all. They're already one thing. We're already the mirror and the tile, and we sit to become that. So Dogen is saying that the act of polishing the tile, doing zazen, is polishing the mirror. It's like it's the same thing. We're doing the same thing. It's our usual way of thinking about what we do in practice, like we're trying to do this thing. And it's unavoidable that we have we create a contrast between clarity and confusion. At some basic level of our mind, we want everything to settle down, and we want it to be peaceful, and we want it to be quiet. We have this idealized view of what our Buddha nature is going to kind of show up as. And it's not going to show up as us. It's just, it seems like, that seems such a thing we cling to, that it can't just show up as us. And he talks about polishing the tile in a way that I really like, because it's like you polish it, it's like, here is something precious, that you take care of. And that our sitting is like we're polishing something precious to us, not because we want it to become something else, but because it's deserving of care and it's deserving of cherishing. So we're not polishing the tile to become a mirror. We're taking care. Our sitting is a way of taking care. So I think for me, it's like really seeing how inevitably and how easily, really easily, we just create these dichotomies, bloody A student and crap all me, the person who's doing it right, the person who's doing it wrong, that if we can just keep going, I will become something else. And I really get the longing in that. I really get that we actually want that, because this embodied skin bag, as we say, just doesn't seem like it could possibly be an expression of Buddha nature. Surely we think it has to be something else. But I'm really curious about, if people could imagine just for a moment, that we could soften our conditioning and let go of these old narratives, of not good enough, not as good as, and just see the care that we're taking in our sitting practice. Just see the way that we're cherishing the kind of ceremony of just showing up exactly as we are. And sometimes when I'm sitting, I heard this quite a while ago, probably from someone else, but I can't remember. But it's like, sometimes I'm practicing like a tired Buddha. And sometimes I'm practicing like a fed up Buddha. And sometimes I'm practicing like the actual Buddha. And sometimes I'm practicing like a stuck or a sad or a despairing or a joyous or an expansive, or, it's like, oh, I'm practicing like that. That's how I'm practicing today. We're all in our various costumes. And they shift and move because, as the talk said the other week, you aren't who you think you are. And some of who we think we are so not who we think we are, in terms of just identifying with our contracted selves. So I have a very poorly remembered story, which is the kind of story that amuses me. And I've enjoyed it, even though I couldn't find it when I was trying to look it up. So it's a deeply misremembered story, and should you ever quote me on it, um, please say it's a very misremembered story. But the story, the way I have constructed it inside myself, is of a very shy and introverted monk going to study at a temple, and the guy in the kitchen, who is like a really big figure, loud and sure of himself and full of confidence and quite bossy, and he's busily being there in the kitchen, and this shy monk sees this person and he's so envious. He wants to be this person. And so he works really hard. He does all his practicing, he does all his sitting, he does all his rituals, and he doesn't stop being his shy self. And one day he plucks up courage to go into the kitchen and ask the big monk, is like, if I practice hard enough, will I become like you? And then the monk just laughs uproariously at the absolute craziness of the notion. And he says, never, never. You'll never be like me. And he's not going to be. And we're not going to be like each other. And there's something about that kind of deep acceptance of like, no, you're going to be like you. You're going to be just like you. So, whatever we think we're going to become, we are so clearly already who we are. And then we dance with the paradox that actually everything's in motion and this thing that we are is constantly in flux anyway. So there is this gorgeous thing of becoming more and more who you are and less somebody. In the Heart Sutra, it says there is neither ignorance nor extinction of ignorance, neither old age nor death, and death nor extinction of old age and death. No suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path, no knowledge, and no attainment. With nothing to attain, a bodhisattva relies on prajna paramita, and thus the mind is without hindrance. Without hindrance, there is no fear. Far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. And this place where you're not the dichotomy, you're not the thing waiting to become another thing. We are exactly where we are. Shahaka Okamura says, the Flower Ornament Sutra says, I now see that all sentient beings everywhere fully possess the wisdom and virtues of the enlightened ones, but because of false conceptions and attachments, they don't realize it. We don't become something, we realize something. And that is realizing both as a sort of thing in the mind, like to realize something, but it's actually much more, we realize it into the world. We are a manifestation of it into the world. And we will always, just always feel like our unready, unsteady selves. And we aren't who we think we are. We are very much more and very much less.